Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We have a very special guest with us on the Sweetwater Minute this week. We have W.S. Holland with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in. We're so pleased to have you.
My pleasure.
Only drummer that ever worked with Johnny Cash. Is that correct?
God, can you imagine why John put up with me that long?
Oh, I can imagine.
I started in 1960 and ended in 97 when he couldn't work anymore.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. You were on all the big hits.
Yeah.
Folsom Prison.
Yeah.
Boy Named Sue.
Yeah.
Walk the Line. Ring of Fire. All that great stuff. But you started earlier than that.
I actually started with Carl Perkins
Right.
in 1954.
Mm-hmm.
We drove over to Memphis, me and his two brothers, and played the only thing we know to play at that time, and Sam Phillips liked it. Got a recording contract that day.
How about that?
And it's a lot of funny stories about it. That Blue Suede Shoes, we went back later and recorded that, and it was a big hit. And I asked Carl later, years later, why did you ask me to go to Memphis with you to record, knowing I never played, didn't know how to play, couldn't play. I borrowed some drums, set them up backwards. Right. He said, well, I wanted to pull up at Memphis in a Cadillac car, and you was the only person I knew had one.
So, that's a great story.
Well, then I tell the young kids getting in the music business now, first thing you got to do is get a Cadillac car.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is. I had read that was actually the second time you had played drums. Was your first session at Sun? Is that true?
Oh, it was the first. Well, really, what happened? You could say it's the second time, but it was on a Saturday night. Carl asked me to go. I said, man, I can't play. But he talked me into it, so I borrowed some drums the next day. Mm-hmm. And I took them at my mom's house and set them up. And that's where I set them up the only way I knew how. I thought if I'm going to be playing the hi-hat with my right hand, it needs to be sitting over here.
Makes sense.
Instead of over here out of the way.
Yeah, right.
And I never had center drum set up, so I didn't know. So on a Tuesday night now, we do go down to a little club called a Cotton Bowl. And I sat in down there. I couldn't do that. I had to hold the brushes and I'd play. Took both hands to do that.
Right.
And did that night. Then got up Thursday morning and went over to Memphis in my Cadillac car.
Right.
And went in and played. I bet you never heard the first song we made, Movie Mag.
I don't think I have. How about that?
Well, it's kind of strange. It was a song, Carl wrote the song, and it's like, let me take you to the movie mag so I can hold your hand. It's about a boy taking his girlfriend named Maggie to the movie. No, his girlfriend was on a horse named Becky. So climb up on old Becky's back and let's ride to the picture show. Right. Sam Phillips liked that.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. Then we went back later in '55 and did the Blue Suede Shoes.
Okay. And what were the sessions like for recording those tracks? You're in Sun Studios. You'd never been in the studio before, I'm assuming.
No.
It had to be very exciting to go in there. And so how did you record those sessions? You were all set up around one microphone, correct?
Still that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's a room about the size of this. Mm-hmm. And of course, when we went in, we just set up in the middle of the floor and no drum booth, no booths for singers, everybody. That's what made it happen. See, everything in the studio was going in all of the mics.
Uh-huh.
See, the voice was going in drum mics. The drum sound was going. That's what made it unique. Mm-hmm. And I still do that a lot. 3 or 4 times a year, I'll go over with somebody that wants to record in the Sun studio. It's still open, still doing good. In fact, a little while back, a group from Europe came over, and I went over and recorded with them. And then later, they had their release, and I went over there and did a tour with them.
Wow!
So for some reason, I don't know. There's a lot of people think now that if they go to Sun Studio and record, and if they have me with them, that it will be something that would come near being a hit record. So don't tell them any different.
I won't. Don't worry. Nobody. I think it's true.
Yeah.
You get the whole vibe thing.
But imagine coming in here, just setting up and set over there with a recorder and just
playing.
That's the way it was.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So the story that I heard is that you were actually about to retire from music, and then Johnny called you and asked you to do some gigs with him.
1960. See, we did the Blue Suede Shoes thing and did the $1 Million Quartet thing. Do you know how that happened?
Well, tell us.
Well, we being Carl and his two brothers and me, was back in Sun to record the song after Blue Suede Shoes. The next release was Matchbox. Well, the reason Jerry Lee was there, Sam hired him to play piano with us. See, he hadn't got started yet.
Okay.
And so this was in 56, but in 55, see, Elvis and Scotty and Bill started in the middle of the year in 54. And then Carl and his brother and me started at the end of the year in 54. Then in 55, here come the rest of the group. John, Jerry Lee Lewis, Roy Orbison, just a whole big group of people. And we all toured together because Sam Phillips and a guy named Bob Neal started a little booking agent called Stars Incorporated, just booking the Sun artists. So that's where we all worked together for a long. In fact, man, it's one of the big places we worked down in Amory, Mississippi, and they were redoing that thing. Was a big deal going down there. But when we went back to do that, to record Matchbox, John and Elvis had heard we were in town. So they just dropped by to say hello. Nobody knew they were coming. They didn't. And so when they drive by, they say, how y'all doing? Getting conversation, and it just turned into a jam session. Elvis told Jerry, he said, get up and let me sit on the piano and show you a few hot licks. And if you see the picture,
right?
See, that's what happened.
Sure.
Yeah, and Jerry Lee didn't even get mad. Then later that would have made him mad. But it just turned into a jam session. Now, nobody thought anything about it, but two things happened that made it a big, that later made it a big deal. One, that night, Sam did think to call a photographer. And Jack Clement, who was running a recorder, he didn't think anything about it. He just turned the machine on when they started singing, and we couldn't hardly hear what they do. We just started playing all of that. It wasn't and never did manage to get a good sound out of it, no kind of mixing, but release it anyway.
Sure.
Now, Jack turned on the machine and let it run and went next door to the Taylor Cafe and got him a sandwich. See, he didn't think nothing about it.
Right.
Those two things hadn't happened, it wouldn't have happened. But later, you know, people ask me now, doing interviews, say, man, what was it like being in the studio with all those big stars? I say, hey, I wasn't in the studio with a big star. They hadn't started to be a big star yet.
Right.
I thought a drummer could be a big star.
Sure.
And the main thing I was interested in, it was the time that Sam was having to keep time and pay union scale for a session. Union scale for a session that night was $11. And all I was concerned about was getting my $11. Right. So we did it, and the guy come made the picture, and it was later when Elvis got to be a big deal, and RCA wanted to release some of it, and they, you probably heard about it. There's kind of a little bit of an argument about paying different people. They said Johnny Cash, I don't hear him singing, he wasn't singing on it and all that. And they got all that worked out. But then what made it a really big deal is a guy named John Cassette. For some reason, I can't imagine anybody doing it. Have you seen the show?
I have, yeah.
He had the idea to make a Broadway play and got all the guys and got it all done. And I've been to it probably 10 or 15 times. They called me, and I went to the opening in New York, and they got about 3 different groups performing now. And as many times as I've seen it, I can't hardly wait to see it again.
It's great.
It's great. I don't know how anybody had the thought to make this play out of what happened that night.
Right.
And the guy that does Sam Phillips and all of them, he does so good. Actually, it's as much about Sam, the play is, as one of the guys.
Sure.
But it's for something like that to happen back then, nobody think anything about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you know, I told Sam, and I'll show you. I told Sam later when it became a big deal, I said, Sam, if you'd have just had that photographer guy to pan over about 3 feet, I would have been it, then it would have been famous. And look here, here's the way it would have looked.
Yeah.
How about that? See that?
Yeah. See, that would have been the right way, right?
Yeah,
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'll give you that back as well. So, after $1 Million Quartet, is that then when you went on the road with Johnny, when you started playing with him?
No, get back to that story. I was going to quit business. I thought it was all over. Seemed like Sam had lost interest in the studio, made all the money he needed to make. Mm-hmm. He was buying stock in Holiday Inns and radio stations, and I was still in Jackson, Carl and me, and I was driving around Jackson with a big long Cadillac I'd bought, paid down on, had it financed. I'd spent all my money I'd made. Carl and his brothers spent all the money they'd made. Mm-hmm. And I was going to get a real job. And when I tell this on my shows, I said, Carl and his brothers spent all the money they'd made on, well, they was thirsty a lot.
Okay.
And I'd spent all my money on cars and speedboats.
Okay.
And over buying clothes over at Lansky Brothers in Memphis. And I'd met Joyce. And we'd planned to get married and did get married, and I was going to retire. It was over. I figured I'd done all I would ever do. Mm-hmm. Played on the Blue Suede Shoes, the $1 Million Quartet, been to the movie, the Perry Como Show. And you still got all these films on now, look at it. And I'd met her, and she had a good job. Mm-hmm. She had a car paid for, had a house paid for, and she finally talked me into marrying her.
Nice.
That was in 1960, and next month, Valentine's Day, we're celebrating their 54 years.
Wow.
All this time. Had a great time.
Wonderful.
2 great daughters, and a granddaughter, and a great-granddaughter.
How about that?
Yeah. All these years finally made me great. But I didn't get to retire. I got a call from John Cash. He said, we got an engagement a big deal up in New York, a big building, big place, for a week, and a week down in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Steel Pier. Go with me for those 2 weeks. So he'd heard me play all those years. Mm-hmm. He didn't have a drummer, just had the 2 guys. And I said, John, I can't go. I'm quitting the music business. Me and George just getting married, and I've already got me a job lined up. But I said, let me see if I can call the guy I'm going to work with and put it off for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. I did, and the boy said, okay, go ahead. I went for those 2 weeks. We went up, did the week at New York, came back down to the Steel Pier, and he said, man, I really do like what we're doing here. And said, I want you to work with me occasionally. Mm-hmm. I said, John, I can't work occasionally. I've already got me a job. I'm going to have a payday every week. He said, well, when I mean occasionally, I'm going to book 10, 15 days a month and do whatever I do, and I'd like for you to be with me as long as I'm in the business. I said, well, that sounds like a regular job. Right. He said, it'd be as regular as I can make it. I called Joyce that night, told her, I said, well, I'm going to stay in the music business. Right. So that was in 1960, and the last show was in 97.
Right.
And the weird thing about it all is, of all the people in the group, see, at one time we had a big group, mm-hmm. even had an 8-piece band. Marty Stewart was in the band and all. and with the drivers and the managers and agents and the people at the office. There were several people, and out of everybody, we've had about 8 different guitar players, 8 or 10 different bass players, piano players. For some reason, I was the only one that stayed the whole time.
You were the anchor
Yeah.
behind the whole thing.
And, you know, people said, man, even back in the Carl Perkins days, and then with John all that time, said, man, of course, they heard a lot of stuff that actually wasn't true, but they said, man, how did you put up with all that? Why did you stay so long? I said, well, somebody had to drive. So, and this year, I'm starting my 60th year sitting on that drum stool, having a big time playing.
Incredible.
And so far, and another thing I'm proud of, I've never tasted an alcohol beverage or took a puff off of a cigarette.
Good for you.
And I want to think maybe that might have had something to do with it.
Sure.
But when I tell that, some people say, man, you didn't have much fun, did you? But it was as much fun watching them as they had doing it, because they didn't know it.
Right.
So,
right.
And I tell this, I'm going to have on my 100th birthday, I want to invite you
Well, thank you.
and all my friends, all 2 of them, and we're going to have a big party, and I'm going to do something spectacular.
Great.
I'm going to smoke a cigarette and take a drink of whiskey.
That's going to be the big event.
There
That's
you go.
great. That's great.
But that's, you know, I don't know why things happen like they did.
Sure.
It's just, and at the time it was all happening, nobody thought anything about it. We were
Right.
just doing what we did and having fun doing it.
Right.
And now some people talk about the bad days that John had, all those bad days. He didn't really have any bad days. Most of the stuff that you heard about he got into was like between tours. When we was on tour, everything was always went pretty good.
Right.
I was into something else that I was interested in. I was always interested in getting home. I raced boats all my life, and for 3 years, a national champion on running outboard powered boats. And I was anxious to get home and race boats and be with the family. And a lot of things that he got into, I didn't even know till later.
Sure.
I know the one. I know you've seen this because you saw pictures of it. The deal he got into in Dallas, and he got arrested. And it was one of the 2 times, I reckon, that he actually stayed in jail for a night. A lot of people think Johnny was in prison, but
Right.
he never was in prison except when we played there.
Right.
But we'd ended the tour in Dallas, and I went home, and tour was over, and 2 days later, a friend of mine called, said, hey, they got John in El Paso. I said, no, he didn't. He went home from Dallas. He still lived in California then. And he went home and we come home. No, they got him in Dallas. They had it on the news, and sure enough, you saw the picture later where Vivian, his wife, came to get him, and they were walking down the stairs off the airplane.
Sure.
So he decided, he got by himself, we'd all come home. He's going to get off the plane in El Paso. So, hey, I'll just get off the plane, take my guitar into Mexico and put some drugs in it and bring it back. Won't nobody know it. But stuff like that happened when he was off by himself, more than it did when we was together.
Okay.
And I heard about it later.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So when you went up then to New York to play with him, that was actually the first time that a drummer had played. That was before Elvis had a drummer, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I mean, by then a lot of people had drums.
Okay.
But now in '54, when I started with Carl, very few, the only drums then was in big bands. And there was a few drummers that was known, like Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa, and so. But as far as drums in little small bands and in country music and stuff like that, no drums. See, the Grand Ole Opry didn't allow drums.
Right, you were the first to play
I was
there,
the
right?
first one.
Okay.
But then in '55 when we did Blue Suede Shoes, and now people started having drummers, and I do somebody asked me now, said, what do you think was the most important instrument for us creating rock and roll? And I said, well, let me talk about it just a second before I answer that question. I said, there was always, from the beginning of time up to the 50s, 55, there was all kind of instruments, guitars, bass, pianos. Nobody thought to call a music rock and roll. Now, 52 or 3 or 4 along in there, Joe Turner cut a song called Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Nobody thought about saying rock and roll.
Right.
Bill Haley and the Comets did a Rock Around the Clock.
Right.
Nobody thought about saying rock and roll. Nobody thought about saying rockabilly. Now, Blue Suede Shoes come out, and it was the first record that somebody wanted to call rock and roll to market. And I think that was the beginning. Somebody else will tell a little different story on it that they don't really know. They read it from somebody wrote what they thought about it. So, getting to answer your question now, the instrument that I think was the instrument that created rock and roll was the drums. And most of the time they say, you know, that sounds right. And then I'll say, and the fella that I think caused all that to happen was me.
Sure.
So
Yeah. Well, you were there. You were the man.
so then I make a joke out of it, and I said, really, I think the guy that started all that ought to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I agree with you 100%. I agree with you. Well, Johnny called you the father of drums, right?
Yeah.
That was how he would introduce you when you were playing on stage.
Yeah. But now, by the time I joined him, there was several small bands had drums, but they didn't allow them at the Grand Ole Opry.
So how did that go over when you showed up with your drum kit?
Well, what they did allow before I went was a guy standing up with a drum, playing with a stick and a brushes.
Okay.
But the first full set, and it's another kind of a strange story. John called, said, we're doing the Grand Ole Opry, and he said, bring your drums and those funny little things that goes clang, clang. Talking about the cymbals.
Sure.
So I go in, set my drums up on the stage at the Ryman Auditorium.
Right.
Well, here comes the manager. I said, WS, you can't do that here. I said, look, I work for Johnny Cash. He called me and told me to bring my drums, and that's what I'm doing. And he just shook his head and went to the office, and I set the full set up and played them that night.
You got to stand your ground, right?
Yeah. And I've still got those drums.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Still got them.
Wow. Those are priceless
Yeah.
at this point. That's awesome.
They're Gretsch. I can't wear them out.
Yeah? You've been playing Gretsch all these years.
Yeah. But then later, they got drummers and drum risers and the whole deal.
Right.
And see, back then, if you remember, the drum sound everybody was playing was on the upright bass, hitting the neck of the bass.
Right.
See, and they hit it. It was on the 2 and the 4 beat, like the snare drum. Then they'd pull the string, and that on the neck of the. And when I come along, it kind of made that type bass playing go out of style a little bit.
Right.
So some of those guys didn't like me too good.
No. Taking their job away, right?
Yeah.
So what was it like going into Folsom Prison to record that album? What was that whole experience like?
It was just another gig. We didn't think anything about it. We never thought about being scared of anything. Everybody was nice, no problems. And that audience with those inmates. I said from the beginning, and I still believe it, that audience reaction is one of the things that made that a big record.
Sure.
And that's one thing that John liked to play prisons like that, because it was always a great audience reaction. We'd played a lot of prisons besides that. And but it's kind of strange. We never thought about being any kind of danger, anybody hurting anybody.
Right.
We went in, did the show, and left. And it's the next year. But it's funny about prison shows, because there's so many times that something really big happened. I think that show, and then next year we did San Quentin, had a boy named Sue.
Right.
It was a big record. I think those two shows right there really was a big deal in just skyrocketing John to big time stardom.
Sure.
But far as us thinking about any kind of danger, we didn't even think about it.
Right.
And really, if you look at some of it, it was actually a few times John, he was almost saying some things, trying to cause some trouble to him, you know. But,
get the crowd going a little bit.
yeah, never a problem.
Right. Wonderful. Wonderful. So today you have the W.S. Holland Band.
I do.
You're touring?
Well, hey, I was going to retire again. In 97, I said, well, it's all over now. I'm going to retire. And I don't want to quit playing because, see, I never could do anything really good. So because of that, even now, it's an honor for me to say that I can do anything good as I ever could.
Sure.
See, because I never could do anything very good. So I was going to retire again.
Right.
A friend of mine named Ron Haney, he plays guitar, and he's with my band now. He said, you don't need to retire. Let's get a band together and play. People want to see you all over the world, kind of the movie and all that, and then being with John Cash. I said, what would we call a band? He said, we'll call it the W.S. Holland Band. I said, as good as you guys are, you'd be in a W.S. Holland Band? They said, yeah. So yeah, we started that, and that's what I still do.
That's great.
Yeah, and you know, I told you about retiring. I'm not going to do it again.
Why would you do that?
Yeah,
Why would you do it?
Well, you know, I am so lucky. So many people, and a lot of my friends played music when they were young. Then they was either luckier than me or not as fortunate than me, but they got out of the music business and got into something. You know, some of them make a lot of money, but to make a living and all that. And now they retired and play music. So then I got thinking, if I retired, what I'd want to do is play music and race boats. So that's what I still do. So why retire?
Why retire?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So if you had, after 60 years in the business and all the wonderful things you've done, advice for someone who wants to have a good long career in the music business, what would your advice be? Clean living?
If what I'm going to tell you happens, I'll tell you what I'm going to say and where I'm going to say it.
Okay.
There's some people that started a program. I don't know if you've seen it or not on Facebook or whatever. There's an award. They call it the Ameripolitan Award, and it's about musicians that's had a long career. I don't really know a lot about it, but somebody has nominated me for it, and there's a lot of people nominated, and I'm going down to Austin, Texas, where the award ceremony is going to be the 18th of next month. And which I know I won't, but if something happens that I win the award, I'm gonna talk about this. What you said.
We'll wait till then.
If they'll give me if they'll give me time, I want to say a few words and I'll thank some people. For, and then I want to tell everybody all you young people or everybody that's trying to get in the music business, the thing to do. Don't quit and don't give up. Never give up. Keep trying, because things happen real fast in the music business. It just took me 60 years to get this. Now, it'd be nice if I get it so I could do that, wouldn't it?
Well, I think you will.
Oh,
you have my vote.
I know. But back to your answer, hey, it is the greatest business in the world to do if you can be lucky enough to make a good living. And because of the people I was with, I was lucky enough, and it's been great for me and my family. And the only thing I would change, if I could change anything, is have all those guys still here and let's still doing it.
Right. Another jam session, another $1 million.
That's right.
That'd be awesome. WS, thanks so much for coming in.
Hey, thank you.
It is an honor and a privilege to have you here, and thanks for all that you contributed to music and all that you've done through the years. It's just such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, and don't forget about me now.
100th birthday, I'm there. I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.